Welcome. I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher, from our BizVision studio in the UK. You're watching The Conscious Business Show on the BBTV network. The consultants McKinsey say that with the pandemic, the business world has accelerated forward 7 years in as many months. And no more is this apparent than the stage of the new workplace, new thinking, new society we're now having to play on. For many, this stage is frightening, for others exciting, but it's also a time for making the wrong move, especially in digital transformation. It will be crucial as we all realign our businesses to this new normal. But how to do it correctly and make sure that you're not just having any IT solution into your digital transformation. My guest today has some answers for you. He's the CEO of Avantra, a leader in helping businesses with their digital transformation, efficiency, and effectiveness. Welcome, John Appleby.
Hi, Malcolm. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show.
Lovely to talk to you. I'm in a wet northeast of England, but you're in a sunny Philadelphia, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, as we say, it's always sunny in Philadelphia. It's beautiful out there, and you can see the light on my face is coming from the window outside. So
okay, all right. Stop making me jealous. Now, John, let's start off by your telling us briefly, please, and in layman's language, what it is that Avantra does, who it does it for, and why is Avantra needed?
Yeah, absolutely. So Avantra is an automation platform for IT operations. And what does that mean? So we take all of the manual activities that people have to do with systems on a day-to-day basis, and we automate those with machine learning and artificial intelligence. Why is that important? And we do this specifically for SAP, which is the world's largest enterprise software company. And it's important because over the last 30 years, a whole cottage industry has arrived of people who repeat the same activities day in, day out, not adding any value into the business, but adding cost into the business.
Yes, now I'm getting it. You've said that businesses need to take a no judgment zone approach to digital transformation. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and I said that pre-COVID, but it is even more the case now. So many times, a software manufacturer's perspective tries to drive the business agenda of an organization. We need you to do cloud. We need you to run on the latest version. We need you to do this, and now more than ever, businesses are going to do precisely what they need to do to survive and to thrive. I need to evolve my online sales so that I can direct drop more effectively, lower cost, and higher frequency. Well, that's where, as a CEO, I'm going to invest. I always joke about Pennsylvania liquor stores. They didn't have an online sales capability when the pandemic happened. They couldn't direct drop. So when they had to shut the stores down, they couldn't ship liquor. Well, that's an imperative to change.
Yes.
And you take that by comparison to the IT software manufacturer's perspective. Sometimes they just want you to make a change to update a system or to spend money, but it doesn't provide a return. So my perspective is we have to be judgment free, especially as an IT operations company. We've got customers that run 30-year-old SAP systems, and they still run them, and they're running some piece of the organization. And it's fine. It's some subsidiary, and they're planning to shut the subsidiary down in 5 years. They do not want to invest a penny more in that platform than they need to. So we'll support that. You want to update to the latest customer experience platform and integrate that back into finance and logistics. That's also fine by us. We don't judge what you decide to do as a business. What we do is we support it, we automate it, we drive the cost and efficiency down.
Excellent. Now, getting it even closer now. John, you're kindly guesting on our Conscious Business Show, as I think that Avantra is a keen driver towards aspects of the consciousness agenda, particularly the consciousness of tech and the good it can deliver. Am I right in my thinking here?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And if I think about how the SAP industry evolved, it sort of gives, and we compare that to how other technology industries evolved, it's really illuminating. So if we go back to the early 90s, when ERP became a big thing, people wanted to take 160 end markets and they wanted to run finance a single way. They wanted to centralize into these centers of excellences, and they cut billions and billions of dollars of cost out of the business. They made things much more efficient. They were able to do reporting quickly. And that at that point in time made a ton of sense. And that, of course, was in a sense, a consciousness agenda at that time. Now we take that through into the modern day, and it's been left with a legacy of a tremendous amount of cost which sits in the business. That's nothing compared to the benefits that were obtained 20 years ago. But in today's term, we're talking about tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of cost for a typical large business. And now we compare that with what Salesforce, what Google, what Microsoft or Amazon have brought to the market. And they've transformed all of IT operations in our area. I think that it is absolutely necessary in the SAP market for us to do exactly what's already been done elsewhere, to drive that cost out. And with it, of course, drive more agile businesses, more secure businesses, and businesses which have a lower environment and economic impact, whilst at the same time freeing up all of these people to go and do really high value, high thinking jobs in the same area. And by the way, it's impossible to hire people in the SAP ecosystem right now.
Right. Okay. By the way, just as an aside to that, I read as it came through by carrier pigeon just before we started there, your latest press release about innovation. You've done a survey in conjunction with Agos, isn't it? And it's telling about people are not focusing enough time on innovation. Am I correct there? I mean,
yeah,
it's only just arrived, as I say, by carrier pigeon.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the Americas User Group, ASUG. And my hypothesis was that customers were spending more time running the systems than they were being able to innovate in them. And we were shocked by the findings. In fact, we found that over 70% of the time is spent running systems and not innovating on them. And that's the first thing we found. The second thing we found is even more interesting, which is the people who had invested in innovation and automation were the same people, and they were the same people that were reaping the benefits of lower cost. So it's this virtuous circle you can get into. You just have to make the switch. And amazing that we found in the SAP install base how few customers had been able to make that switch, despite being open to it. This wasn't a lack of desire.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just that frightened to make that little step, isn't it? Now, when I read through your website and, of course, look past the techie language, I see a company with a consciousness message and urging customers to have a big focus on the importance of their own customers, in how those customers operate and how they are served. How are you doing this? After all, it's an emotional thing you're trying to get across as to what your software does, as opposed to, should we say, the functional story that IT usually buys.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you for a story from a past role that I had, and I was working with a utilities company in Malaysia, and their CIO was also their chief HR officer, which is I don't think I've ever seen that, very unusual. And I met with him and I said, "What? We delivered this. It was like an expensive solution or something. We said we did this." And I said, what was the impact to your business? And he said, "My executives get to spend more time with their family." And he said they used to have to sit in the office until 9 p.m. doing approvals and paperwork. He said now they can go home and they can do it on their iPad. And that kind of led me to think with Avantra, I always look back on that moment because that to me connected technology to humanity, and that doesn't happen enough. Yeah. And I met with the CIO of a very large apparel retailer in the US, and I said, "What are your big problems?" He said, "I don't like it when my team they have to get up at 2:00 every Saturday morning to do maintenance schedules." He said, "And I don't like that." He said, that's not good for them. It's not right for them. It's not right for their family. It's not a good use of their time. Can you help me automate the maintenance windows that have to happen, where work has to happen. We have to be secure and we have to run the business. But I don't want this guy getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
So I think that's a great salutary lesson there, isn't it?
Yeah. And unfortunately, not enough business leaders think that way, but they're going to have to, because, with COVID, everyone is working from home. And so the impacts of stress are so much higher than they were. The ability to delineate between personal and work time is harder. And so, we've found that people need to take more time out than they did. They need to take hours in the day where they go and focus on other things. And so things like this 2 a.m. thing is much more brutal than it used to be. And if you don't look after your people, there will be attrition.
Yes. Now, we'll talk about that just a bit later on in this interview, but I want to talk now about business continuity. Business continuity, in our mind, is essential thinking for the conscious supplier or vendor, you would call over there. The pandemic has changed thinking, especially in supply chain, which in many cases we've found were not robust or resilient. What's your business continuity message that you would like businesses to get and to act upon?
Yeah, I always think, first I'll tell sort of story of SAP in this context. So SAP really pioneered just-in-time manufacturing. And so the whole plan is that you run an extremely lean supply chain where things move their way through as efficiently as possible. And if you look at the large toilet paper manufacturers, which of course is a key focus of these supply chain problems, they ran about 93% capacity at any point in time. So if they want to increase capacity of toilet roll, they can only do so by 7%, unless they invest about $400 million in another toilet paper plant. That's regardless of whether you can move the pulp and all of that. And so I always think it's ironic that SAP kind of caused the toilet paper shortages of 2020 in a sort of slightly indirect way. But it's also a lesson that they never planned for this scenario. They planned for all kinds of other scenarios. They planned for civil war in the countries in the South American countries where they cut the trees. They planned for severe weather conditions, but they never planned for a pandemic. And I don't know what we can really learn from that, because this is a once in a 100-year event that's happened. But I still think from a business continuity perspective, you can go and say, what can I do about this now? And I come back to that human point that we just covered. A number of the IT outsource fund companies couldn't get people in the office because they had stay-at-home orders, and they didn't have laptops and they didn't have remote work. And so what they did was they focused on getting these people laptops. And I would say that's the wrong focus. You need to focus on automation, because this is how you really gain business continuity. If you talk, for example, to the folks at Google, the whole of the Google Cloud is automated. They have this thing called SRE, Site Reliability Engineering. That is their core tenet of what they do. And if one site goes down, it moves across to another site, and business continuity is implicit in what it is they do. And so I would say, don't think about getting people laptops. Think about, how can I ensure that I have business continuity by design whilst having human operators as actually improving operations over time?
Okay, just a minute, sorry. Okay, I mentioned that we're on a different business stage now, but a recent research by a recruitment company found that 40% of work from home employees were looking for a new job, principally because they felt that the support from their present employer during the pandemic was, let me say, inadequate. What do you think employers should be considering then about now how they correct this in their work from home and the collaborative tools as they readjust to this new normal?
Yeah, I find, in the world I live in, I find that absolutely fascinating and a little bit depressing at the same time. Because the first thing that happened when this happened is I pulled our chief people officer and I said, we need to figure out what our strategy is to make sure that we retain people, to ensure that their mental health is as good as it can be, to ensure that they take time out, and to ensure that they have a work-life balance. And we need, to make sure that they have a good working environment at home. And we need to proactively ensure that that's the case. So we immediately started both an automated survey approach. Actually, thanks to SAP and Qualtrics, we did that. We employee survey on a weekly basis. We measure engagement with people. We have regular kind of mental health check-ins with people. We organized a whole set of things to ensure that people feel looked after as well as they can be. My previous call to this one was exactly that, because you're locked in the northeast of England where you are, been locked in since June. Like, that has an impact on mental health, and we have to openly talk about that. It's going to drive you a bit crazy, depending on your personality, especially if you're an extrovert. And so we have got to, as leaders, get a handle on it. And I find it unconscionable that 40% of employees are looking for a new job because leaders are failing in their ability to look after their employees. It is so difficult to hire good talent.
Yeah.
It's like in sales, it's so difficult to win new business. Why do people focus so much on new business rather than looking after the existing customers?
Yeah. Now, in a recent interview I held in the USA in Portland, Oregon, with futurist Rebecca DeCosta, she advised people like Jobs at Apple and Larry at Oracle. She said, and in her book On the Verge, that today's leaders need to learn agility and adaptation, but to forget trying to do it fast. They need to learn pre-adaptation. Now, that seems sensible. If you know it's going to happen, why wait until it does? That is, to do it well before it happens. Is this in your thinking? Is it going to happen? So let's do it now. How much can you know of what will happen in IT? I know AI and ML are coming in strong, but how do you see pre-adaptation working both efficiently and effectively for your customers or potential customers in rebuilding post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I watched that interview and I thought it was interesting. I think there's a few things. So first, I think, first of all, before pre-adaptation, what you really need is self-awareness. And if you look at all of the big, these big famous failures, it's really easy with the benefit of hindsight to see that Netflix was going to disrupt Blockbuster. But or that Apple was going to disrupt Nokia. But I think it's really difficult to predict that. And if they could have predicted it, could they have even done anything about it? And this existed, by the way, in our SAP ecosystem, because SAP with R3, its very famous ERP product, had done very well for 30 years. And they have now tried to leapfrog that with and cross the chasm with their new product, S4. It remains to see. History will have to play out, right? We can't say whether it was successful or not. The indications are okay. But first of all, we need to be self-aware about what are the potential threats to our industry. And so bring this back to Avantra. So have a think about these systems integrators. They spent the last 30 years milking the installed base for days. And I spoke to a very well-known leader in one of the big consultancies, and he said it doesn't matter if it is automated, it just needs to look automated. He said, I send it offshore, he said, and I get 20 people working on it in 2 weeks, and an automated report comes back. That's completely missing the point of disrupting your business. That's anti-disrupting. And by the way, he's moved on from that role since then, which is probably connected. But you've got to think, what's going to disrupt my industry? It becomes self-aware of that. And now, how do I eat my own lunch?
Yes.
And you've got to take the hit from that, whatever it looks like.
Yeah.
Apple did this with the iPhone. They cannibalized the iPod, which was just a bizarre move at the time. And you look back on it and you go, oh, okay, well, and maybe, by the way, Rebecca advised Steve on that. I don't know, but somebody at Apple realized that they had to cannibalize their own business. And as CEOs, this is what we have to do. We say, what are the threats And then what's the opportunity? And then if we have to cannibalize our own business to go after it, we have to convince our board to do so. At Avantra, we're fortunate in that we are a small organization disrupting a very big market. And that's a much easier place to be than an incumbent who has to disrupt their own market. That is a very difficult journey.
Brilliant. Yes. Good thinking. And a conscious business is aware and acts on its responsibilities. What do you say to those people who believe tech is lacking in many areas, especially environmental impact? After all, data centers consume vast amounts of energy, don't they?
I'd say to people that say that they need to go and research this area, because they're wrong. Don't often say right and wrong, but they're wrong.
Okay.
So Google became carbon neutral in 2007. They run 100% on renewables, and by 2030 they will be carbon free. They will have reversed all the impact they did in the meantime. So if you move your infrastructure onto the Google Cloud, you're also carbon neutral. So it's really back to front to what people might actually think. And I don't know what more to say to that. The very biggest companies, and Microsoft is exactly the same, by the way. They are absolutely focused on how do we actually take the impact. And the other industries are not focused anyway. The automotive industry outside of Tesla is not thinking that way, thinking how many cars do I sell? The oil industry, certainly energy industry, is not thinking that way. They're not really driving towards renewables, despite the fact that solar energy is less expensive than any other kind of energy. So I think the accusation on the big tech companies of not being environmentally conscious it ignores, the reality of the situation. Again, as it relates to Avantra, our point of view is sort of simple, which is we cut the cost of running the systems, but it also relates to the people that need to do that. They can go and do more important stuff. It relates to their carbon impact. It relates to the tremendous amount of travel that used to happen. That isn't happening right now, but the millions and millions of air miles that were done by consultants flying around the world just to maintain systems which could be automated. The opportunities are everywhere.
Yeah, excellent response, John. And just before we move on to our last question, I just want to remind people to have taken down your URL, which is on the screen behind me there, because you really have a very, very fascinating website to look through and get through that consciousness understanding as well. John, I like to give all my guests 3 wishes. If I were to give you 3 wishes for how business leaders should see how digital transformation can be good for consciousness in our new society, new normal world, what would your 3 wishes be?
I mean, I don't know I'm going to exactly answer your question there, because we're in such an odd space in time, but I would really wish for good health for all. I would wish for a world in which, hopefully we don't have this tremendous division that we have right now. And I'd wish for a world where we can work together as leaders towards a common goal. And perhaps that doesn't quite answer your question, but, a week before our presidential election, that's kind of what's on my mind.
Yes, I'm with you. We'll not go that far, John. But John Appleby, CEO of Avantra, I have thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I've really enjoyed the very straightforward and lucid interview that you've kindly given me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, Malcolm.